Hi everybody, how you doing? This is Mitch from Hard Intentions YouTube channel. Uh, we also have hardintentions.com where we sell t-shirts, prints of this artwork you see in the back. You see the ones in the frame back there and the one on the wall behind the painting there. Those are prints. I just frame them up. I sold the originals. I don't really regret it, but you know, I wish I still had them. But they went to a good person, a friend of mine, and they're in a safe place. So we do sell prints of my work and t-shirts, and we are working on hats. This little pandemic thing we got going on is kind of slowing down progress on a lot of stuff. So look, I want to talk today about work. Uh, Something a lot of people are out of right now because of this thing going on. But you know, in the county jail, there wasn't a lot of work. You know, I was 17 when I got busted. I turned 18, went to prison. And you know, when I was a kid, I worked with my dad, roofing houses. When I was 10, I was on the roof, you know. And what they would do is they would give me the back of the house. So if anybody drove up or drove by, you know, they wouldn't see me roofing the house. Plus, if I did a crappy job, you know, nobody would see it from the street, you know. But my dad used to roof houses with a hatchet, right? And a roofing hatchet. He had a nail gun, all that stuff, you know, the air compressor, hoses, all that in the back of his truck, but he never used it. And I used to ask him, hey man, let me use the nail gun. He told me no. If you're going to roof houses, you're going to work with me, you're going to do it the right way. And, you know, he was a Korean War vet. He'd been roofing houses since the time he was 16 years old, man, and he was good at it. You know, I met guys years later, even in prison, the guys that worked with him told me, hey man, your dad was an awesome roofer. And you know, my cousin and I talk about it because his dad was a roofer too. And he says, yeah, Bud. They called my dad Bud, you know, but he said Bud was an awesome roofer. So, you know, I remember one time I was roofing some houses in Coronado, and these wood shakes, you know, and the overhang is where the building's here, and then the roof overhangs it. So you got to drive the nail in. Now they use short nails, but what he would do is drive the nail in halfway and bend it. Go boom, 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 right? So I'm like, yeah, cool, you know. So I'm doing that. I'm driving it in halfway, bending it. That way the nail doesn't pop through the overhang. And so at lunchtime, I went, you know, farting around and came back, and I forgot, and I just drove the nails all the way in, you know. And at the end of the night, you know, it's like 5:30. Everyone's packed up, leaving, and he goes, hey, come here. And he grabbed me by the ear, man, and twisted my ear up and lifted me up off the ground. I was like, what the hell, you know? And he goes, you see that shit? And he, you know, he pointed to the second half of the day. The nails are poking through the, you know, the overhang. And man, he was mad as hell. And he gave me a pair of wire cutters, and he made me go up there by the light of his truck and cut all those nails off, you know. And man, I never did that again. Well, you know, he was a prick. He was a mean son of a bitch, you know. But one thing he did instill in me is the ethics of, you know, work ethics, you know. And you know, before I got busted, I was going around looking for work, and I just, you know, well, actually, when I was sitting in the county jail fighting this beef, my homegirl Cindy called because I used her phone number. You know, they didn't have cell phones back then. And I didn't have a stable phone, so I used my homegirl Cindy's phone, and I called her from the county jail. She goes, hey man, I got people calling here wanting to give you a job, you know, and I was sitting my ass in county jail. I think if they would have called a couple weeks earlier, man, I might not have been at the place I was at when I got my case, you know, but that's all said and done. It's in the past, and here we are. So, you know, when I went to prison, I went to the hole. I didn't last long. I got a shoe term. I did a little shoe term. And back then, guys, you know, could work in the shoe. They would, you know, look, the tiers are 5 tiers high. And when they bring the food in to self-feed everybody, they used to push it in a cart. Then they had guys that were doing shoe terms. They would take the food up and down the tiers, you know. They'd bring the food all the way up that came in containers, these round containers or pans, right? Number 6 pans. And they would take the food up the tier and put it in the hot carts, plug the hot carts in, all that shit. Then the cop would pass out the food. And yeah, I worked as a tier tender. So any leftover food, you know, the guy would kick me down And then my job was to come out, and collect all the trays and take them to the back of the tier, dump the slop in the trash can. And then the guys would come up, and take the food pans back down the tier. But that was my job. Also to clean the shower, sweep, mop, all that kind of shit. But of course now in the shoe, you don't come out of yourself for jack. You go out for a little hour or two of yard, in a little walk-alone cage. We call them dog runs, But yeah, it's kind of sad. But I remember this one cop, Buffalo, man. He was from Texas, and he had an accent to begin with, and he had gotten in a helicopter crash there in Vietnam twice. I guess he was a helicopter pilot. He walked with a limp, and he talked with a lisp, And he wasn't afraid to come on the tier when guys were out there. Some out there, and I would talk to him, and I said, "Where you from, Buffalo?" And he says, "I'm from Texas." And I'm like, wow, it was hard to understand, But he was from Texas originally, When he came back from Vietnam, they told him, you're not so disabled that you can't work. So go over there to that prison and get a job at that prison. So that's what he did, And I saw him years later, around 98. He'd become a sergeant. He was in Corcoran. He said, "I don't like it here. I want to go back to San Quentin," He called it Sam Quentin, But yeah. So anyway, he was a tier cop, man, and he would he tripped me out because when you go to the yard, they go look in your cell, and I got a batch of wine going, and what I used to do is I'd empty out my shitter, right? Put a plastic bag in there and make my wine in the shitter, and I'd put a toilet seat cover over it, right? And don't ask me about but yeah, so he knew I made wine. If I had a 5-gallon bucket, I'd make it in a bucket. But so one day breakfast was over and everything, and he goes, "You want some oranges, Holmes?" I go, "Sure." And he cracks my door and he slid a whole box, man, of oranges in my house. I was like, "Oh hell yeah," And he would give me bags of sugar, because back then they gave us sugar, and a little scoop of sugar, on the tray, and yeah, Buffalo was cool, man. So my work ethic was, we shower, and that shower is my job to clean the shower. So I do a good job. I clean the tier good. I look out for guys on the tier, And it was cool. Later on, I ended up going to CMF for them programs and everything, and I was in a hole, and they said, "Look, you could work your way out to the main line, or you could fuck up and go back to the shithole." So they gave me a job working in the kitchen, and I was a cook for a while in the kitchen, and then I got a job running the food up and down the tiers, and then cleaning the foyer area in front of the cage after each meal, It was cool, and then I worked my way out to the main line, and of course, working in the kitchen like that, you always get extra food and all that kind of shit. But working, that CADX program is a 90-day observation I did, and having that job helped me work my way out to the line. The cops see, and they make reports, to the counselors, "Hey, this guy's a good worker. He's not causing any problems, But also we had contact visits, and we'd go down there at night, man, and smoke weed in the kitchen, blow it up in the vent. This guy was getting visits, and he had a little weed, and he said, "Hey," and I'm like, "Yeah, cool," But so when I got out the main line, I'm like, and I got to remember, I'd never been on the main line yet, and I hadn't had a job, so I'm running around looking for work, and I knew I needed a trade for the board, but I didn't really want to get one right away. I didn't want to get involved with that crap right away, So when I was in the hole, this guy told me, "Hey, they're going to try and put you out on the back dock of the kitchen." And he was out on the main line. He got busted trying to do a little escape trip. And he goes, if you get a job in the back dock of the kitchen, they got a guy out there. He's the lead man, and he spies on people for the cops. And I was like, "Yeah, all right, whatever." So and he told me this cop's name that ran the unit I was in, where the stress program, the CAT V, the Security Housing Decompression Unit was. He told me that cop's going to try to get you a job on the back dock. So, to move around, you got to get a pass. So I get a pass, and I go here, I go there, and it just didn't pan out, man. And so sure enough, that cop says, "Hey, you want to get a job on the back dock? I can hook you up." And I was like, well, I already knew, because I was warned that there was a guy back there, the lead man was telling on people for the cops or spying on them, whatever the case was, you know. So I said, yeah, sure, man, I'll go back there, you know. And so I got a job working on the back dock of the kitchen. And we used to dump slop cans, you know. And then clean the slop cans, you know, trash cans, metal trash cans full of slop, man. Things are heavy. You lift them up on a pallet, two guys lift them in the truck and dump them. Wash the cans, wash the dock, you know. And so I did that for a little while. And, yeah, I got a problem working. I do the work, but at the end of the day, man, you know, back then the food was pretty good. They still had, they had this, it was turkey pastrami. Everyone called it stink meat because if it sat around, it would start stinking, you know. And they put it in a sack lunch, so by the time you get it in your lunch, you know, that was in a hole, it would start smelling. But man, that stuff was good. I liked it, you know. As long as it was cold, it was good. And they had ham, they had real meat, you know. And I'd have guys in the butcher shop slice roast beef, stuff like that. You know, the diet kitchen had a diet kitchen at that place for guys that were diabetic or had dialysis or all that kind of stuff. They had bomb food in there, and I had a friend in there. He'd slide me stuff out. So I would make sandwiches. I mean, big fat ones, you know, with all kinds of meat and cheese, and tomatoes, all that shit, you know. And I'd wrap them up in foil, and then you put them in a, you know, a little cellophane around your waist or whatever. Depends on who the cop at the gate was. You know, a lot of cops let you slide out with food because you're working, you know. But anyway, I would take them to the building and sell them for a couple bucks. You know, they had ducats there. Each ducat was worth $1. Funny money, you know, yard money. And they had a little canteen on the yard you could buy stuff with. And guys wheeled and dealed and traded them. And you know, we trade those like 2 ducats for $1. So if you had a $100 bill, you could get 200 ducats from me, you know. But one day I was in the can room, you know, making these sandwiches and wrapping them up in foil. And that dude comes in there and he says, "Hey man, you're getting a little carried away." I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "You know, all this you're doing too much." I said, "Hey, fuck you, man. This is state shit. You know, this is state food. You know, fucking, you know, pound it." So me and that guy didn't get along too well, you know. And you know, I'd show up late for work some mornings, and you know, it was he would get pissed off. So I ended up losing that job, and you know, I'm not going to say nothing about that. But I ended up going to Milling Cabinet. So it was a vocational program, and you know, vocational milling cabinet, and they had an instructor in there. He was a really nice guy. His name was Mr. Snooks, and I don't know if he's still alive, but you know, he'd been working in prisons for like 20 years at that time, and you know, he was a Christian guy, man, and he kind of looked at it as his duty to the Lord and to his faith, you know, was to teach guys a trade, so when they got out of prison they could make some money. And that was his deal, man. And he was a little guy, soft-spoken, you know, and he was just a family man, and he's just a super nice guy, man. And I was a big, gruff kid, you know. You figure that was about 84, so I was 23 years old, you know, and I'm driving iron, I'm snorting crank, smoking weed, and just, you know, I was just a savage kid, man. And that guy would communicate with me just on a normal level, like I was just anybody else in the world, you know. And he taught us a lot, man. And so the thing was, you know, you would study a chapter, then you would go out. You know, they had Yates American bandsaw that was huge, probably as tall as this room, man. It was at least 7-8 feet tall, because it was taller than me, and I'm 6'4". Big giant wheels, you know. Yates American went out of business in the 40s, I think. They had a Yates American planer, shaper, and table saw, big 18-inch table saw, you know, bandsaw. It was great. They had an 8-inch joiner. It was this awesome shop. They had mortise and tenon machines. They had just all old school equipment. They had every tool you could imagine to make cabinets with in a tool room. You know, back then there was no biscuit joiner, none of that kind of stuff. They had a doweling machine that would drill dowel holes, and so you would get a project, you know, for the chapter you were studying, go do the project, and then And then if some office needed a desk organizer, or some captain wanted some shelves put in his office, whatever, we'd make that kind of stuff as our project, you know. Take them across to the paint shop and have them shot with lacquer, you know. It was a nice setup, man, and I really enjoyed it, you know. And so at that same time, they had the hobby shop where you could work with wood. They had all the tools, and then you would go down there, buy your own wood, your own glue, your own. I use Danish oil most of the time, or Deft, you know, to finish my stuff. Velvet for jewelry boxes, whatnot, you know. So I sold a little bit of artwork, and I got the money to buy wood. So I would go learn stuff in the milling cabin, and then go to the hobby shop after work and after vote, and work in a hobby shop, you know, make stuff. And they had a store out front where you could sell it. So I really thought that was cool, you know. And I got the idea, man, that, you know, I made a few jewelry boxes when I first started. They weren't too cool. I didn't think they were all that great. And they sold, you know. I sold them. I put them out for sale in the store, and they sold. And then whatever money you make, like if you make $50 on something, the state takes 10%, so they would get $5, and it went to what was called the Inmate Welfare Fund. That was part of what, you know, kept it going. So anyway, I put those first jewelry boxes out there, and I thought, man, this is like selling dope, but it's legal. I can make stuff, put it out there in that store and sell it, man, and it's safer than selling dope. It's just, you know, I had these big dreams, you know, when I get out, I'm going to get a wood shop, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you know, and so, yeah, it was fun. And so later on, you know, Schnooks tells me, I got a project here, you know, and I go, all right. And he says, you know, how much confidence you got in yourself? And I said, well, you know, how much do I need? and so I had the deputy warden's secretary wanted 5 pieces of office furniture. So I made a big computer workstation. We made 2 credenzas, me and this other cat, 2 credenzas, and he did something else, and then I made this big giant file. It's a big box, you know, big giant, like an armoire type thing, but they put these big heavy metal file cabinets in there, and it's all raised panel wood. You know, we use cheap wood, we use alder, you know, but you know, it was nice. It came out nice, and we did that for the deputy warden's secretary. And, you know, I always thought like administration buildings, all that stuff were out of bounds. You know, I'm like, whoa, you know, but here we are walking around the administration. They got secretaries, captains, all this stuff. All their offices are out there. I was like, wow, this is a trip, you know. So then that lady, you know, the secretary, she was grateful, you know. And then later on, I got in some trouble. And, you know, I ended up quitting that job. And, but I went to the hole for a brief stint, and that deputy warden, Nyberg, he let me out of the hole. You know, he knew I was working, and, you know, I did that for his secretary, so it kind of paid off later on. But Bill Nyberg was quite a guy. He was a hell of a dude. You know, we had quite a few guys there that were should have probably been in regular prison, man. He kept us there. We were called Nyberg's kids. So he was an old school guy. So that, you know, that's where work pays off. People recognize, hey, you know, you're working, doing well. So later on, you know, I says, hey, man, I want to come back to the milling cabinet, and so the Schnooks told me, hey, get a job at work for 3 months, and I'm gonna get some reports from your supervisor, and then if it's good, I'll let you back in the shop. And so I ended up going back to milling cabinet. I worked for a while as a porter, you know, a tier tender, cleaning the tiers, shower, all that stuff. And selling sodas, you know, 2-for-1 store. I ran a 2-for-1 store, and so I went back to milling cabinet for a while, man. And then Schnooks left, and they got a replacement teacher. He was kind of a prick, and so I ended up walking out of that shop because he had some unsavory characters in there, man. He was favoring them, and it was just an ugly scene. And then my friend, he's you know, he's a motorcycle club guy. You know, he worked in a hobby shop doing leather, and he tells me, hey, look, Smiley, why don't you just come down here and get a job in the hobby shop? I said, well, I tried, you know, and this guy won't hire me. So he goes, I'll come back tonight, you know. And so I go back to the hobby shop that night, right? And I tell the guy, hey, man, I'd like to have a job in here. You know, he was a little skinny guy, you know, real light-skinned black dude, you know, and McKinney, and I think was his name, and he says, well, you want a job in here, huh? And I says, yeah. He says, well, you know, he tells me this spiel about, you know, he doesn't want this, he doesn't want that, you know, and I say, yeah, cool, you know. And he goes, if you fuck up down here, I'm not going to write you up and fire you. And he points to my friend, he goes, I'm going to write him up and I'm going to fire him. You still want the job? And I said, yeah, sure, you know. So I got the job and I worked in the hobby shop there for a few years until I transferred out, you know. And San Quentin, I went back there for a few months. I didn't really get a job. Well, I worked in a carpenter shop for a while, that's where I had the toys. I was, you know, hustling out of there. But, you know, I was only there a hot minute, and then New Folsom, there was no work. So, in Tracy, I went to mill and cabinet, and I finished my mill and cabinet trade there, which was kind of cool. And I bounced over to the carpenter shop, and I used to make stuff for people, and the same thing, you know, now when you make a hobby order, you make the order, they process it, goes to the accounting office, so people control all the inmates' money, and they process it and send it out to the company. And so I got an order to do a bookcase, file cabinets, and a big computer workstation type thing, and I built it, took it up there, you know, and all the ladies up there loved it, man. They were like, oh man, this is a great shit, you know. And one of them, I think her name was Patty or Tina. You know, she was cool. You know, and she processed our hobby orders. And so, oh yeah, she says, I remember your name. You know, I processed them orders. So I'm like, cool. You know. So whenever I made a hobby order, as soon as it left the hobby manager, I'd give her a buzz. You know, on the prison phone line. I'd say, hey, you got my order? Yeah. And my orders, instead of taking a month or two to process, you know, they were out within a couple of weeks. And yeah, so they were appreciative, you know, and that's the kind of things that having a job in prison, you know, does. It opens doors for you. You know, you meet other people, you see how straight up people are, you know, that work there, man. And some of them are assholes, some of them aren't, you know. But yeah, having a job also gets you out of your cell, keeps you off the yard where all the bullshit's at. You know what I'm saying? And you know, then also you can get chronos for when you go to parole board and stuff. You know, your supervisor writes you a chrono, say, hey, this guy's a good worker, this and that. And if you're in a prison, like if you're in a level 3 prison and you don't want to go to a level 2 and you got a good job, your boss can put in, if you're a critical worker like plant operations, maintenance, whatever, they'll put in a paperwork requesting that you stay there, you know, because you're a good worker and hard to replace. And so a lot of times that'll keep you in a prison that you're at, you know. Or if you're in a lower level prison, you don't want to go up to a higher level prison, it's the same thing, you know. You can get your boss to keep you there, you know. So having a job in prison has its benefits, you know. Plus, you know, guys, like I said, you know, like I needed my tattoo machines done, the machinist would make certain parts for me, and then they get a little kick down, and you know, like hobby shop stuff, like guys would want wood or whatever, I'd slide them a little wood and they'd give me a little something for it, you know. And so it's a little economy there that goes with each job, you know. If you're a kitchen worker, obviously everybody wants food, you know. And back then we had hot pots, you know, metal hot pots, and so like if you had steak or hamburger meat or pork chop meat or any kind of meat, you could cook it in your pot, you know, stuff like that. So. But from the carpenter shop, I bounced over to prison industries, and because that's where I wanted to make some money, you know. They had some staff in the carpenter shop I didn't really get along with, so I bounced over to the prison industry. And I started working over there. We had a crew of guys, man, and we all knew each other. We had a couple dudes that were motorcycle clubs, and we had this dude Bob Beeler, and Big Rhino, who I interviewed, was on the crew, and me. And I have to tell you, Bob Beeler was the coolest dude, man. He was a Korean War veteran, and you know, he was in there for being a hitman. You know, I think he had 5. He came off death row. You know, when they declared the death penalty unconstitutional, he came off death row. He ended up dying in prison, but. He told me, Smiley, I'm a gambler, a hitman, and a pimp. And he wasn't kidding. You know, he ran gambling tables in there, and he was, you know, he had 5 murders, man. And I guess he dumped them in the National Forest or something, man. And he told his lawyer, hey, tell that DA I'll cop to 5 counts of littering a Federal Reserve. And he watched when his lawyer talked to him. That DA got pretty pissed off. But Bob was a good dude, man, and we used to cut wood, and we used to cut. We made student desks. We made office partitions, office furniture for all state agencies, man, all throughout the state. If they need furniture, they got to get it from PIA, and we made it. And we made a lot of it. We used a lot of particle board there, 1 1/8". It's an 1 1/8 thick. I think it's 10 feet long instead of 8, and it's 4 or 5 feet wide. But we would cut sometimes 4, 5, 6 units of that shit a day. From start to finish. We used a panel saw for that, and then we used a big giant table saw for other stuff, And then we would cut lumber, they would always order this lumber like a 1/4 inch too thick. So we go out to the planer was outside, right? I'm working with this older cat, he's a motorcycle club man, and he'd say, hey, you just do it like this, boom, boom, and he would tell me, every extra step you take in the process of this, at the end of the day, you walked an extra 2 or 3 miles. So he always had a way to do things that went smooth, And yeah, I remember one time he was on the table saw, man, and this other cat was working with him, and the table saw had 2 guys to catch the wood when it came out the blade, and 2 guys on the other side. One guy would hand the dude the board, and the other guy would run it through, And then on the other side, the guy would get the scrap piece, slide it back for a recut, and then the other guy would take that piece and set it put it on a cart, stack it, the cut piece. And so this guy tells him, hey man, he tells his kid, hey look, because that was an 18-inch saw blade, so the cut off, the fall off would bounce and would kind of vibrate there. If it hit that saw blade, it would kick back, He told him, man, you make sure you get that wood, He told him over and over, get that wood. And the kid was a lazy fuck, always loaded on weed or something. But he let that piece of wood vibrate into that saw blade, and it kicked back and hit my friend in the stomach, Left a big square bruise, for where that piece of wood hit him, So, a few weeks later, that kid was on the receiving end. He was on the other side of the saw blade, and my friend just kind of leaned over there, and instead of grabbing that wood, he just tapped it, and it slid into that saw blade and shot back and hit that kid. And he just stood there and smiled at him, Needless to say, that kid didn't work on that crew much longer after that, But, yeah, so we had a lot of fun, man. We'd cut a lot of wood. We partied. Yeah, but we partied at the end of the day. We didn't party at work. When you're working around all this dangerous equipment, man, you can't be getting loaded, So I went from that saw crew to the shaper crew. I worked in the shaper crew for a while, man, and I had this dude, I used to make seats, so the seats are curved, and the cutter head's like that. And I told this story before, This guy would screw the jig onto the blank, and then I would shape it, take it off, slide the blank over, stack the piece, and then pull the next one over and shape it, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the night, I would work first watch, we worked the night shift. So at the end of the day, it's about 7 in the morning. We're back there smoking cigarettes, getting ready to go. And I hear the machine start up, and I look, I go, what are you doing? He goes, I'm going to finish these last few. And I heard a, and he fed that thing in straight into the blade. Well, that cutter head was probably that tall and that big around. It's a 5 horsepower motor, man. So you got to kind of ease that in there. Once you ease it in there, he's watching me. I just ease it up. Once the cutter head and the ball bearing, the guide hits the jig, then you can zzz, but you can't just jam it in there. And he did, and it yanked it out of his hand, and it shredded these two.